So there was a study done in 2019 by Baylor University. Their religious institute did this study because they wanted to know why people left the faith. They conducted research, and the answer does not shock me, but it does scare me a little bit. The number one reason why people left the faith, at least in 2019, and we probably could argue that this is pretty prevalent in today's world, was because of unanswered prayers. This scares me because this is not a belief that God is actually their problem, but instead it's the belief that He heard your needs and desires and is ignoring them. That He does not care to answer them or love you enough to fix whatever it is going on in your life. And that gets me thinking, how many of us today are on the verge of this or have been at some point in our life? And honestly, think about it. Like, how many times have you prayed and not gotten the answer you wanted or gotten an answer at all? And I'm not talking like, God, if I stop doing this, would you put $1 million in my account? No, I'm not talking about those kind of prayers. I'm talking about the kind where you weep in your room alone, or you're screaming at God while you're driving to work in the mornings, or the kind where you're on your knees every single night praying. Those kind of prayers. The prayers from addiction, for a prodigal son or a daughter to return, for financial breakthrough, diseases to go away. Those kinds of prayers. And I know we have all had prayers like that. Things that have gone unanswered, unchanged, and I want you to know you are not alone in that. There's actually the story of a man named Ted Turner. Some of you may know that name. I personally did not know that name until I looked it up because I don't watch the news. But Ted Turner is the founder of CNN, and he also used to own the Atlanta Braves. So he's a billionaire. He has a lot of money, okay? But before he was a producer, before he was a billionaire, Ted Turner was a teenager who loved Jesus. He loved Jesus until something tragic happened in his life. When Ted was 15 years old, his younger sister was diagnosed with a deadly disease, and for the next 5 years, he watched his sister slowly lose her life as he would sit at her bedside every single night, holding her hands and praying through it, watching his parents go to church and asking for prayer, and people coming to his house, all the while, his sister, goodness gracious, I might slowly be dying. For the next 5 years, he watched his sister slowly lose her life as he would sit at her bedside. And when Ted was 20 years old, inevitably, his sister passed away. And then he watched the man that raised him, his father, who was so deep in his faith, denounce God altogether. And so Ted said, I'm going to do the same thing. And since then, Ted has been quoted saying, well, if God were so good and so powerful, why didn't He answer our prayers? Why did He let that happen to such an innocent little girl? I could never serve a God that would do such a thing. And so Ted Turner walked away from his faith and has not looked back. Now, I'm not standing here this morning to criticize him or to judge him, but I wanted to share that story because I want you to know that it's not unique. It's not rare. There's so many people, even in this room right now, that are wrestling in that same way. I've wrestled with it. I've wrestled with questions that have no answer and seasons of waiting, and I know so many of you do as well. And so with that, I want us to turn to a passage this morning that speaks directly to this, John chapter 11. And I have to preface this. I personally messed up, and there will be no slides this morning, okay? So on my hand, I wrote the page number for the Bibles in the seat back in front of you, 1063. So I want you to be able to follow along with me. So if you don't have a Bible or you don't have your phone, the seat back in front of you on page 1063, that's where John chapter 11 starts. It's important that you follow along because I have a lot to say, but this is the most important thing that will be read today, and I want you to be able to see what God says in John chapter 11. So as you're turning there, I want to preface where we're at in this moment. John chapter 11. In John chapter 10, we see Jesus tell the parable of that He is the good shepherd and that we are just sheep, and He is leading us through hills and valleys. And then He goes to a town and they try to stone Him and kill Him. It's not His time yet, so Him and His disciples slip away and they go off to the wilderness. And then that puts us to where we are in John chapter 11. And so you should have your Bibles. You can follow along with me. And we'll start in verse 4. This is what John writes. When He heard this, Jesus said, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you want to go back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going to wake him up." His disciples replied, probably like many of us would, "Lord, if he sleeps, he'll get better soon." But Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought that he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." And then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." Verse 17, on his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Thank you. Mary stayed at home. And Jesus said to her, Martha said to Jesus, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die." "Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who has come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here, and he's asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And then the shortest verse in all the Bible, verse 35, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been in there for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." This is the word of the Lord. And there's a lot going on in this passage. That's 40 verses. And so from that 40 verses, I want to draw 3 questions. And so there would be a slide of this, but I messed up. I want you to know that. So write down these questions so you can have them in front of you. Question number 1 that we get from this passage: why do I have to wait? Why do I have to wait? That's the first question. Question number 2, if I'm going to wait, well, where is Jesus in the waiting? Right? Where is Jesus in the waiting? And question number 3, what do I do when hope is lost? What do I do when hope is lost? And we'll go through these one by one so you have a chance to write them down again. But the first question is what we're going to look at. Why do I have to wait? And the beauty of all of these questions is those 40 verses answer the questions for us. So we're going to look at that. And so let's look back at verses 5 and 6, because these 2 sentences sitting next to each other should not make sense. It says, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 more days. I need you to catch that word, so. It doesn't say yet, it doesn't say but, not even though. So, therefore, consequently, as a direct result of his love, it says he loved them, so he waited. He loved them, therefore he stayed where he was. Now, I know what some of you probably just did. You reread it because it doesn't make sense. Everything in us, in our world today, says love runs, love drops everything. Love shows up when the worst things happen. That's what love does. That's what love looks like. If you love somebody, you don't sit still when they're dying, but Jesus sits still. And John, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, has the nerve to connect those two things with the word so. But I want to sit here for a minute because we know how the story ends. We could skip past this, the waiting season, and look at the glorification that comes at the end. But the delay, the waiting, is the part that most of us are actually in right now. Most of us are not in verse 43 or verse 44. Most of us are somewhere between verses 3 and verses 17. We've sent the message. We've gone to Jesus with the things. We've fallen at his feet weeping, and we're still waiting. And it's in this waiting that we start to draw conclusions. We start to think, well, maybe he just doesn't care. Maybe my situation is too small. Maybe I did something wrong and this is the consequence. Maybe God is real, but he's not personal. Maybe he's out there somewhere, but he's not in here, in this, with me. He's not in my marriage. He's not in my body. He's not in my family. And every single one of those conclusions could feel reasonable at different points. And that's because we're making them with an incomplete picture, with the information that we have. And so are the disciples and Mary and Martha. Like, look at it. In verse 7, Jesus tells them they're going back to Judea, and they push back immediately. They say, Lord, the Jews that they were there, they tried to stone you. Like, they wanted to kill you there, and you want to go back? Now, their concern, it's completely reasonable, but it's also pretty selfish, right? Because they also don't want to go back because they will get killed as well. But they're looking at this situation with everything that they know, and they're making the most logical conclusion available. They're working with just an incomplete picture. It's just pieces of a puzzle. C.S. Lewis lost his wife Joy to cancer. He had prayed desperately for her healing. She ended up passing away anyway, and he wrote about what it felt like. He wrote about what it felt like to go to God in grief and in prayer. And he said it feels like going to a house where you know someone is home, where you can hear movement inside, there's lights on, but the door is bolted shut. And as you knock and you knock louder and louder, the door stays locked and the lights start going out. And that image sticks with me because that's exactly what unanswered prayer feels like. You know somebody's there and listening. You've heard them before. You've seen the evidence that they're around, but not right now. There's still darkness, still a bolted door. And Lewis, he didn't walk away from faith like Ted Turner did, but he felt the same thing. The difference was not the pain. The difference was what he concluded about the silence and what the silence from God meant. But look at verse 11. Jesus tells the disciples, Lazarus has fallen asleep, and I'm going to wake him up. But they think, like us, he needs rest. Like, Lord, if he sleeps, he'll feel better. They think Lazarus is just resting and he's going to be fine. So Jesus says it plainly in verse 14. No, Lazarus is dead. He's gone. He's not alive anymore. And here's what I want you to notice. Jesus is not surprised by this. He's not scrambling. There's no moment in the passage where Jesus looks at the situation and tries to recalculate everything. He's not panicked. He's never behind. He knew exactly what was happening in Bethany, even though he was 2 days away. He knew his friend Lazarus was dying. He knew the sisters were grieving. He knew the tomb was being sealed and stayed where he was, not because he didn't care, but because he could see something nobody else could see. But then we get the answer to our question in verse 15. In verse 15, here's your answer, and this is why you have to wait. He says, "For your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe." For your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. And you're thinking, he's glad? His friend is dead. Lazarus, the sisters have been in agony for 4 days. And Jesus says he's happy that he's gone? Yes, because what's about to happen is going to do something in these disciples and the people around that a healing on day one could have never done. If Jesus shows up immediately and heals a sick man, that's a cool miracle, but he's done that. But what we're about to witness is going to permanently change what they believe about who Jesus is and what he has authority over. There are things that God can only build in you through the very thing you prayed he would prevent. Now, I know that might be hard to hear. I know it's not easy. And it cost us something to hear that sentence. It cost Martha 4 days of grief. It cost Mary 4 days of tears. It cost Lazarus his life until Jesus decided to give it back. Martin Luther King Jr., when he was sitting in the Birmingham jail writing on scraps of paper in one of the loneliest moments of his life, wrote these words. He said, he had to believe that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. He could not see the outcome from where he was sitting because he was in a jail cell. The cause looked like it was losing. The silence of those who should have been speaking was deafening. But Martin Luther King refused to conclude that the silence meant the story was over. And that's the posture John 11 is calling us to refuse to conclude that the silence from God means that the story is done. Because some of us can't see the arc from where we are standing right now. You might be in the middle of your story. You're somewhere between verses 3 and verses 17. You've sent the message, you've wept the tears, you've done the things, and you've not seen them move yet. And so you ask the question, well, why do I have to wait? Well, Jesus says, so that you may believe. So that what comes out of this builds something in you that an easy answer, day one miracle could have never produced. And so I want you to know you're not forgotten in your waiting. You're not invisible in the midst of it. You're not being punished in the waiting. You are being formed in it. And the same Jesus who sat still for 2 days while his friend died, who let the silence stretch past the point of human hope, is the same Jesus who is going to show up at your tomb. He has the last word, and so we ask the question, why do we wait? So that we may believe. Okay, well, we have to wait. We get that, but the second question is this: where is Jesus in this waiting? Like, if I'm going to be in seasons of waiting, which we all will, where is Jesus in the midst of it? And we see Jesus finally shows up 4 days later. I want you to feel the weight of that number, 4. 4 days, not 4 hours, not the next morning, 4 days. The tomb is sealed. The mourners have come from Jerusalem. The house is full of people doing what people do when the worst thing happens. They're showing up, they're sitting together, they're grieving out loud. This is not a quiet moment. This is a public scene with witnesses everywhere. And Jesus walks into this. Martha hears he's coming and goes out to meet him before he ever even gets to the village. And the first thing out of her mouth is, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Now, I need to tell you what that sentence is and what it is not. That's not a failure of faith. That's not a rebuke. That's not Martha losing her trust in Jesus. No, this is what faith looks like when it's hurting. The depth of Martha's pain is actually the proof of the depth of her trust in Jesus. She's not walking away from him. She's running towards him with her wounds open, in her hands laying at his feet. And here is what Jesus does not do. Jesus doesn't say, hey, calm down. He doesn't correct her. He doesn't say, Martha, you should have more faith than this. He doesn't hand her scripture verse and walk past her to get to the tomb. No, he stops, he engages, and he meets her right where she is. And he walks her through a conversation. Your brother will rise again. And when she answers with correct theology about the last day's resurrection, Jesus does something I don't want you to miss. He takes her future tense theology and makes it present tense in the moment. In verses 25 and 26, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Not I will bring it, not I have access to it, not I can arrange it if the conditions are right. No, he says, I am it. Church, that's one of the great I am statements in the Gospel of John. 7 times in John's Gospel, he says, I am. deliberately echoing the name God gave Moses at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. This is not just a statement about what Jesus can do. This is a statement about who Jesus is. He's not a mediator between you and resurrection. He is resurrection. Life belongs to Jesus because he is life. But then he stops mid-sentence and he goes, Martha, do you believe this? So I want to stop. Church, do you believe this? And that question is the hinge of the entire Gospel of John. And it does not land in a theology classroom. It does not land at a comfortable Sunday morning service where everything is going well. It lands on a dusty road outside a village where grieving women and are grieving the loss of their brother who's now been dead for 4 days. He doesn't ask her how she feels. He asks her what she believes. And Martha's answer is one of the great confessions in the New Testament. She says, I believe you are the Christ, the Son of God, who's coming into the world. But before she sees anything, before one single thing changes in her circumstances, her faith is not waiting on the evidence. Now Mary, she stayed at home, grieving in the house until Martha comes to get her and privately whispers, the teacher's here and he's asking for you. So when Mary reaches Jesus, she falls at his feet, which is always where you find Mary in the story of John. In this gospel, Mary is always at Jesus' feet, and she says the exact same words Martha said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Same words, same wound, but she doesn't say anything else. There's no follow-up, there's no confession of faith, no hedge of hope, just hurt and tears. The weeping crowd around her joins in, and now watch what Jesus does in this moment, because this moment is so important. Verse 33, he sees Mary weeping, he sees the crowd weeping, and John uses a word to describe what happens inside of Jesus that most of our Bibles would probably translate pretty gently. But it doesn't mean mildly moved. It does not mean Jesus got a little emotional. This word in the original language is forceful. It's visceral. It describes a deep internal upheaval, something closer to indignation or anger or anguish. The kind of thing that comes from somewhere deep in your gut, not just something behind your eyes. But what's he angry at? Well, it's not Mary. It's not the crowd. It's not the mourners. He's angry at death. He's angry at what sin did to God's good creation. He's standing there watching death devastate people he loves, people he ate dinner with, people he laughed with, people who belong to him, and something in him rises up against it. He's not a detached observer. He's not managing the situation from a distance. No, Jesus is feeling it in that moment. And then, verse 35, Jesus wept. I want you to sit with those two words for a second. Don't rush past them. Jesus wept. He knows what he's about to do. He knows that Lazarus is about to walk out of that tomb. He knows in a matter of minutes, this grief is going to turn into the most astonishing moment any of these people have ever witnessed, and he weeps anyway. Why? Because knowing the outcome doesn't make the present pain unreal. Because foreknowledge does not require emotional distance. Because the Word made flesh, the Son of God, who spoke the universe into existence, does not observe human suffering from a distance. He walks into it, he stands in it, and he weeps in it. There's a woman named Joni Eareckson Tada who at 17 years old dove into a lake and she broke her neck. It caused her to be paralyzed, and she's been a quadriplegic for decades. She's lived with chronic pain her entire adult life, and she has prayed for healing more times than she could count, and she's not been healed. But she has this quote that sticks out to me that I heard years ago and I could never shake, and it goes like this. I know God could heal me. I know God could heal me, but I've come to believe that He is more interested in me being with me in my suffering than in removing it. Because it is in the suffering that I've come to know Him in ways I never would have known Him otherwise. Now, I'm not standing here telling you that God's not going to heal you or fix your situation or answer your prayers. I'm not saying that. But I am saying this. Before he fixes it, He enters it. He earned it with Martha on the road. He gave her doctrine because she needed something to hold on to intellectually. He gave her the I am statements. He gave her the question that became her confession. He entered it with Mary on the ground at his feet. He didn't give her a sermon. He asked one question and he wept with her because she needed someone to feel it with her more than she needed someone to explain it to her. He did not give them the same thing because they are not the same people, and he knows the difference because he's personal. And so here's what I need you to hear before we move into the third and final question. Some of you have been in waiting so long that you have started to believe that Jesus is not in it with you. That you've started to believe that silence means distance, that unanswered prayers mean he has moved on and looked over you and decided your situation is not worth his attention. But I want to point you to verse 35 and tell you that's not what the silence means. The same Jesus that wept at Lazarus' tomb is weeping at yours with you. He's not managing from far away. He's right there in the middle of it, feeling it, troubled by it, indignant at what sin has done to you. And guess what? He's been there the whole time. So when we ask the question, where is Jesus in the waiting? We know the answer is he is still there. He always will be. But that leaves us with our third and final question. What do I do when all hope seems lost? What do I do when all hope seems lost? Well, that's where we find the sisters of Lazarus. Mary and Martha surely felt like all hope was lost. Their brother had been in the tomb now for 4 days. And I wonder how many of us have asked this question. How many of us are waiting when we don't know that Jesus is in the midst of it, when everything seems dark and out of our control? What do we do? Do you turn to things? Do you turn to alcohol? Do you turn to drugs, lustful things? Do you turn to work or your hobbies? What is it? What is it that you turn to in those moments of doubt and fear, when you're not in control, when you're silence surrounding you? Well, we see Martha, she turns to doubt. Jesus tells her in this moment to remove the stone. But she rebuttals and says, Lord, he has been in there for 4 days. There will be an odor. He is dead. My brother's not alive anymore. But then Jesus says, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So roll the stone away. In a moment where all hope is lost, they do as Jesus says, and they step back and they watch. Jesus then prays out loud, thanking God, making sure the people around knew where his power was coming from. And then there, in a moment of silence, nobody moves, nobody speaks, the mourners are there, the crowd is watching, Martha standing at the tomb with her sister Mary, and they know what's inside of it, their brother who is dead. And all they can do is wait to see what Jesus does next. Have you ever been in that moment? You've done what God told you to do. You rolled the stone away even when it looked foolish. You obeyed even when you didn't understand. You showed up even when hope was gone. And now you're standing there watching and waiting, looking at an empty tomb with nothing left to do but to see if he is who he says he is. And can I tell you, that's one of the most vulnerable places a person of faith can find themselves. You've done your part. The stone is rolled away. Now it is entirely in his hands, on Jesus. And then Jesus raises his voice in this moment. 3 words. He says, Lazarus, come out. And we see 4 days of death unravel. The man who was dead walks out of the tomb. The situation that was finished was not finished at all. The story that everyone agreed was over was not finished because Jesus had not spoken yet. So, we ask the question, what do we do when all hope seems lost? You remember that every person at that tomb thought they knew how the story ended, and every single one of them outside of Jesus was wrong. Because none of them knew what Jesus was about to say. And so many of us are in that situation right now. We don't know what he is about to say over our situation either. And can I tell you that sickness does not have the final say? Jesus does. That addiction does not have the final say. Jesus does. That broken marriage does not have the final say. Jesus does. That prodigal child does not have the final say. Jesus does. The depression or anxiety does not have the final say. Jesus does. That diagnosis doesn't have the final say. Jesus does. The failure that you fall into day after day does not have the final say. Jesus does. And can I tell you, church, that death doesn't even have the final say. Jesus does. So remember, when all hope seems lost, that Jesus has the final say. And so this morning, I don't know what it is for you. I don't know what it is in your life that you need to know that Jesus has the final say over. But I know what it is for me. So I want to share that with you. I'm going to tell you a number that will mean nothing to you, but it is 5,480 days. Tomorrow will be 5,481, and it'll continue. But that's a rough estimate for how long I've been a follower of Jesus. 5,480 days, but it is also the amount of days that I've been praying for my dad to come to know Jesus. 5,480. And so I don't know what it is for you, but I know that in the story of someone like my father, Jesus has the final say. And I don't tell you that so that you feel bad for me. I don't tell you that to pity me. I tell you that because whether it's 5,480 or 8,480, I will still praise Jesus' name because I know that no matter what, he has the final say over all. And I also tell you that to know that you are not alone in your waiting. There are people all around this room in that same place, in the waiting. So when we think back to the questions that we asked from the text, why do I have to wait? Well, we know why we have to wait, so that we get to believe that Jesus is who he says he is. We get to watch him work and move, even in the waiting. And so when we're waiting, where is Jesus? Well, we know that he is in the midst of it. And then what do you do when all hope seems lost? Remember that Jesus has the final say.